The 2019 Nancy Drew TV adaptation is infamous for having an added supernatural twist, but the ghosts are just fun window dressing on a very human show that tackles issues of identity, love, and mental health. It also delights in continuity and foreshadowing, placing lines of throwaway dialogue or background characters that will only become relevant episodes or even seasons later. All of this comes together spectacularly in the Season 2 finale, The Echo of Lost Tears, which has Nancy entering her own mind, or dreamscape. The dreamscape is full of Easter eggs, callbacks, and layers of symbolism that you might not have caught on first watch, so today we're going to be taking a deep dive through those layers. Obviously, there will be heavy spoilers through all of Season 2, but I will not be going beyond that. Still, if you haven't gotten that far, I do recommend you go and watch it first, take some time to process it yourself, and then dry your tears and come back when you're ready. So let's set the scene. Season 2 sees Nancy falling into a downward spiral. As time passes, she starts feeling more and more alone, losing her sense of self-worth and taking bigger and bigger risks. Eventually, she confesses that no matter what she does, she just feels numb and empty.
I don't feel anything. No anger, no satisfaction, not even relief, just nothing.
You said that you haven't felt like yourself. You don't know who you are anymore.
Finally, they learn the reason. Nancy's being haunted by the wraith of Gorham Woods, a supernatural parasite. Her friends are eventually able to reverse the ritual that created the wraith in order to destroy it, but even then, it fights back one last time. The wraith pulls Nancy into her own mind and hides itself under layers of her trauma, which she now has to navigate her way through. For each section, I'll be discussing the version of Nancy that we see, the Drew crew member that shows up to help her, the location they're found in, background items of interest, and finally, the door that takes her out of each section and into the next. I did my best to catch everything, but please feel free to leave a comment below with any things I may have missed, or let me know if you have any alternate interpretations. Let's get started. Area 1. Dark Nancy and George on the beach. The first alternate Nancy that our Nancy encounters is Nancy Hudson, or Dark Nancy, as we saw in episode 216, The Pearl-Lined Keys. One of the big themes of Nancy's character arc has been her struggle with who she is, and coming to terms with the fact that her life has turned out much differently than she always thought it would.
And then I realized that I am not who I should be. No college wants this version of me.
Dark Nancy is the lowest that she sank, the farthest she got from the person she wanted to be. She was giving everything to protect her friends and family, but doing so was driving her farther and farther away from them. One interesting thing to note is that while Dark Nancy is dressed how we saw her before, she otherwise looks pretty different. The version of Nancy we see here not only has her hair down instead of up, but her makeup is more cold than it was in reality, and her attitude is much more arrogant and in control. While the hair is most likely for filmmaking reasons, as I imagine it makes it a lot easier to hide Kennedy McMahon's body double, from an in-universe standpoint it does say something about how memory is influenced by emotions, even for someone with Nancy's exceptional memory.
I'm afraid of me. I'm afraid that I don't know who I am. I'm just the worst parts of all of them.
Nancy Hudson manifests in the dreamscape as this almost inhuman, arrogant mastermind because Nancy was terrified that was exactly who she became. This won't be the only thing we see that has been warped from how it was in real life, but we'll get to those later. For now, let's move on to the first member of the Drew crew that shows up to help Nancy, George. This is George from episode 205, The Drowned Woman, specifically from the part where George dies and Nancy resurrects her. Earlier in the episode, when they're still trying to figure out how to stop the Igleika, George is wearing jeans and has her hair up, but she changes to this look after escaping watery death in Nick's truck. George enters the dreamscape by knocking out Nancy Hudson with her trademark crowbar, emphasizing her role as protector of the group and that Nancy doesn't have to do that sort of thing all on her own.
How are you here, George?
Your mind needed a defense for itself, and I'm what it manifested.
It's likely that this version of George is here to remind Nancy that her decisions aren't all things that led her down the dark road to become Nancy Hudson. After all, it was her very Nancy-esque determination to keep trying after everyone else had given up that led her to save George's life. Location. We find ourselves on a beach, and oh my god, I had the hardest time finding this because every other visit to this beach has been at night, while the dreamscape is in almost jarringly bright daylight. This is not the beach where they first called to the Igleika, but where they interacted with the Igleika once cursed. We see this beach in 203 when they try to return Lucy's bones, and in 204 when they attempt to trap her with the Dybbuk box. This location does make Dark Nancy appear very out of place with her fancy nighttime party attire in the sand, as opposed to every other version of Nancy that we find in a place that they naturally would be found. This adds to the generally wrong feeling of Dark Nancy. I also don't want to discount that the way the side shot is framed is oddly reminiscent of the scene where Nancy, Ace, and Amanda first visited Moonstone Island, especially with how the items are littering the beach. We just don't get that particular framing in 203 or 204. So then, why are we here? From the beginning, Nancy had always tried to shoulder everything on her own, but her friends kept insisting on being there for her, until eventually they became a team, a crew. But the Aglagas curse was a turning point for the group. It was the first time they ran into consequences that it looked like they weren't going to be able to escape, and Nancy ended up feeling a huge amount of responsibility for getting them all into it. How fair that actually is, shall we say, debatable.
I can't ask you guys to do this. I don't know what we're up against. None of us do.
That's never stopped us before.
It's not stopping us now.
Yeah, and I kicked over a blood bucket, so I'm marked for death anyway.
But the fact remains that as Nancy had an overdeveloped sense of responsibility to begin with, the belief that she'd put people she cared about in danger set her on an increasingly risky path of doing whatever it would take to keep them safe, regardless of the cost to herself. Looking at it this way, the beach as the site of all those failed attempts to save her friends can be read as the origin place of Nancy Hudson. This can also help us understand why these projections of her friends are here. In addition to moving past her obvious traumas, in the dreamscape, Nancy is also relearning how to accept her friends' help. Background items. Next up, we have a bunch of items scattered across the beach. In the foreground, we have the harpoon that impaled George. We also see Lucy Sable's gravestone, which gave Nancy a connection to her birth mother before she knew about their real one. The lockers of the Claw, which are a total mess, evocative of the time Gil broke in and endangered George by stealing the shroud, but it doesn't look exactly the same. Either Nancy's concept of the locker area is just really messy by default, or again, she's not quite remembering right. There is an American flag, which we most often see at the police station, which could tie into how Nancy pursues justice even when it could get her into trouble. The flag is next to a desk, which I could not find. I looked at so very many desks and could not find this specific one for the life of me. Being next to the flag makes it feel like the police station check-in desk. Maybe it's another not quite right memory. Let me know in the comments if you have a better idea. Also in the category of things I was unable to track down, there are a couple of books piled next to the door. My best guess was that they might be textbooks, which could tie back into Nancy's college dreams. The door. Once Nancy is ready to move forward, she finds herself at a door that looks just like the one that leads to the archive boxes at the Historical Society. Nancy is a person who, for better or worse, tends to act first to solve the problem in front of her and deal with the consequences later.
You got it back from Celia?
That's promised. No, I owe her a favor.
This is often regardless of whatever or whoever is in her way, a quality that came out big time with Nancy Hudson. But another big example was going through this door. When George died, Nancy busted into the archive boxes even though she wasn't supposed to, breaking Hannah's trust and putting the town in potential danger.
I'm sorry, Hannah. I can't lose her. George needs this. We don't know what they're using that shroud would do.
But ultimately, this decision is what saved George's life when no one else could.
Don't be a quitter, Drew. Go.
Nancy looks at the door and walks through it again, accepting that decision and the qualities that led to it as a part of who she is. Area 2. Kid Detective Nancy and Bess at the warehouse. The second alternate Nancy we find is the version of herself from when she solved her first case. She's where it all officially started and represents Nancy's core self, why she's doing any of this. Unlike Dark Nancy, our Nancy isn't ashamed of being Kid Detective Nancy.
We were perfect.
The shame comes from feeling like she let down this idealized version of herself. Drew crew member, Bess. This version of Bess is from the Season 2 premiere episode, The Search for the Midnight Wraith, which was the episode when the Wraith first attached itself to Nancy. The presence of this particular Bess is the least obvious of the crew, and I've seen some different ideas thrown around for it, but here is my interpretation. First, let's review what she did in that episode. When the crew was starting their search for clues on the Aglaika, Bess was the first to act and got the attention of the Bobbsey twins. Bess was also the first to follow Nancy's lead on remembering good things when they were trying to hide their fear from the Wraith. Nancy even specifically looked to Bess for support here. But perhaps most relevantly, Bess in this episode pushed Nancy on examining her Hudson legacy, which Nancy was avoiding out of fear.
But aren't you just a little bit curious about all of this, Nancy? You know, the society, the money?
And the murders and the bullying my mother into suicidal depression and the threats to kill me as a baby.
Bess Bess has always been the member of the group most open to the supernatural, and she's usually the one asking why or making sure they're slowing down and approaching things the right way, one of the most notable times being in the whisper box.
Hey, this is up to Nancy! She's gotta find her way out. Nancy, it's Bess. Please, wake up. You're running out of time.
Bess?
You won't get past her like that, and you are running out of time.
When Nancy tries to avoid her younger self and rush ahead through the door, Bess appears to get Nancy to slow down and first answer why. It breaks the illusion. Nancy's life was never perfect. She had always felt like something important was being hidden from her, and that drove her to always keep searching for the truth. But when the truth turned out to be something she didn't want to hear, she pushed it away because she was afraid. Bess and Kid Detective Nancy remind present-day Nancy of her center, to seek out the truth and not run from it, no matter what. Location. This version of Nancy is right at home outside the warehouse where she solved her first real mystery. We approach it from just about the same angle we did in the pilot when Nancy showed us Gomber sneaking in there. And we're not inside the building, but outside, where Nancy could still choose to walk away and never find out the truth. Check out the left side. In reality, the fence goes all the way around the property, but the Dreamscape fence stops abruptly, like a half-complete memory. Yet Nancy still enters properly through the gap, just as she did before. Background items. We've got a fun assortment here. Most notably, Nancy's corkboard with her achievements is on the outside of the fence. It's also on the inside, it flips around to follow her. It appears to be the version of it just before she tore it up a few episodes ago in 214, The Siege of the Unknown Spectre. Its presence here makes it even more clear why she did that. The board was full of achievements she used to take pride in, and she just couldn't take it haunting her anymore. Features from the wall in the claw are next to the kitchen window. In another example of a not quite right memory, they're on the wrong wall, which extends over where the window would be. Ace's car. It's lit from within, emphasizing the space in which Nancy just spent an overnight drive, although the blue color doesn't give it the most comfortable feeling. A table from the morgue, where way back in 102, The Secret of the Old Morgue, Nancy snuck in somewhere she wasn't supposed to be in pursuit of the truth, just like she did with this warehouse. But the morgue got her in way more trouble than just being grounded. Lucy's creepy children's rhyme is on the wall. There is a pile of barrels similar to those present at the original warehouse. And finally, the jukebox from the claw. I left this for last because this is my favorite detail of maybe the entire Dreamscape. The jukebox only shows up once Nancy passes the fence, leaving the jukebox separated from her in the past and closer to Nancy Hudson. Once it shows up, you can actually hear the song that Nancy and Celia danced to together when they lost their memories.
Oh, I love this song.
And just to top it all off, the song stops right after Kid Nancy says,
"How could you let us become you? Someone who lies, steals, gets people killed."
Nancy.
This show is very good, you guys. The door. So once the Kid Detective has been satisfied, she steps aside and lets our Nancy proceed to the door. This is the door to District Attorney Rosario's office. The last time Nancy walked through this door, it was to recant her testimony against Everett Hudson, going against her own morals and integrity and shattering a big piece of her identity. And once again, she must accept that decision as part of herself and walk right through that door to move forward. Area 3. Grieving Nancy and Nick at the cemetery. In the third area of the Dreamscape, we find Nancy as she was right after her mother's funeral. Solving mysteries and hunting down the truth had been such a core part of Nancy's identity.
It was more than just a hobby. It was part of who I was.
But after her mother died, she completely lost her drive. Because what was the point, right? No matter how hard she searched, nothing she found had been able to save her mom. She gave up on solving mysteries, on her dreams of going to college. There's been a part of Nancy that's been stuck in this grave, in this moment, ever since.
This is the moment that I thought I would never be okay again.
But you can't give into it. Because you did feel okay again, right?
You were a part of that.
Drew crew member, Nick. Nick is wearing the outfit he wore when he and Nancy first met. Their meeting marks when Nancy first started to feel hope again. Back then, he all but literally pulled her out of her mother's grave. This time, she's still got his support, but she has to do it herself.
But I'm still here. With you.
Even though he chose to be with someone else romantically, Nick and his support haven't truly gone anywhere. His line here can be interpreted as having a dual meaning. The present-day Nick and his friendship are still with Nancy, but so is this original version of Nick and the help he gave her. Location. As we've discussed, Nancy finds herself stuck in her mother's grave and has to pull herself out of it to move forward using the strength she's gained in the meantime. When she emerges, it's to the same place in the cemetery as the grave is in reality, but the dreamscape version is much more peaceful. You can't see where the cars are supposed to be, and the dreary rain of that day is over. Background items. We're starting to get a lot less cluttered and random here. Nancy's desk is beyond Nick and grieving Nancy. We usually see her sitting at it when she's working out a mystery on her own. Another desk or table is behind Nancy after she climbs out of the grave. It isn't exactly the same as, but feels very similar to, the one where she and Nick were searching the records room together on their last day as a couple. It looks the most similar out of all the desks I found, and thematically it seems to fit the best. Again, if you have a better idea, let's chat about it in the comments. The two desks on opposite sides of the scene give kind of a duality feeling, maybe representing the conflict that finally ended things between Nick and Nancy romantically.
Why does it feel like we're on different teams?
Nancy, you're the one that never tells me anything.
That's not true. I just don't tell you everything.
Well, maybe that's why it feels like we're on different teams.
Nancy, at her most grief-stricken, felt like she was so broken that she was done with solving mysteries forever. But then Nick came into her life and Nancy started feeling like herself again. Unfortunately for Nick, it became clear that Nancy is always going to put solving mysteries and doing it her way first.
Oh, I don't get it. I mean, why is she being so...
relentless? Single-minded?
It's a core part of who she is, and Nancy is finally coming to terms with that.
Thanks for still being my friend.
The door is the door to the claw, which is always closed for inventory or perhaps a private party. The door, of course, represents Nancy's deepest fear, which is actually doing her job.
George, I need to take a 20-minute break.
We just opened.
Okay, but seriously, I did think of an actual reason.
I've wanted to believe that this isn't my life. And the only thing making it any better is you.
Nancy did genuinely care for Nick, but she was also using him as a way to escape the reality of where she was at in life. She's supposed to be off at college, working at the claws beneath her. She's not actually the type of girl to be wearing this uniform, she assures him. But now, Nancy is no longer stuck in place, mourning the person who she thought she was supposed to be. She walks through the door to the claw to move forward with her life just as it is. Area 4. Baby Nancy and Ace at the Bluffs. This time, let's start with location. Nancy finds herself once again back where it all began. These are the cliffs where she was born and Lucy died. We also saw Nancy back here when the Igleka was trying to kill her. Background items. You'll probably have noticed by now that as Nancy has progressed on her journey, each deeper phase of the dreamscape has had fewer and fewer items to find. The beach was pretty cluttered, the warehouse had a little less, the cemetery was pretty empty, and by the time we've gotten here to the cliffs, we've only got a few items left. I really like this as a sign of Nancy's state of mind. When she first entered the dreamscape, she was a lot more resistant and distracted. By the time she's gotten this far, she's caught on to and accepted what's happening and is much more willing to play along, so her mind is more focused. So then, let's talk about what is here. There's the podium from the claw with the ship steering wheel on it. Feels appropriate considering we're back near the sea. Creepy dolls hang from the trees, just like we saw in Simon's Shrine Tree back in episode 109, The Hidden Staircase. Both of these items feel like they tie into the where it all started theme of this location. Simon's dolls being from Nancy's first solo case, and the claw being the start of Nancy's first case as part of a team. Finally, and this isn't a background item so much as an extra detail, but the blanket that we later see baby Nancy wrapped in is actually Carson's hoodie that he wrapped her in on that very first night.
Just hold on.
Speaking of, Nancy. Appropriately, the Nancy we find at the cliffs is newborn baby Nancy, except at first she isn't even present.
I was born broken, and that's why all these pieces of me are broken.
In order to find this version of herself, Nancy has to accept her, starting down the path to loving this very complicated part of herself. Nancy might not directly remember what happened on this cliff, but it's always affected her. First, that nagging feeling that something was off when she didn't know the truth, and her struggle to come to terms with what it meant once she did. Here in the dreamscape, Nancy's made steps towards loving herself even at her worst moments. But until she lets go of the idea that because her origins were so messy, she'll always be messed up, she won't be able to accept herself fully. To let that pain become love.
I really want that.
This section is also the first to have 2 parts because every other one of her friends interacts with their version of Nancy on their own. George knocks out Dark Nancy, Bess holds Kid Nancy's hand, Nick hugs grieving Nancy. But here, baby Nancy appears in present Nancy's arms, and she can't move forward like that. This time, Nancy has to be the one to ask her friend for help. Ace is there and immediately accepts, but she does have to first reach out and ask. Drew Crew, Ace. Dreamscape Ace is wearing the outfit from 212, The Trail of the Missing Witness. This was when Nancy made her risky deal with Celia Hudson, putting a whole list of people's lives at risk and agreeing to recant her testimony against Everett, all to save Ace's life. Was it worth what it cost her? Nancy's mind thinks so. Once again, her vulnerability and acceptance of herself is the key to moving forward. And just as Nancy needed George to protect her, Bess to remind her, and Nick to encourage her, Ace fits here as the guardian of this most vulnerable part of Nancy. She feels comfortable opening up to him because she trusts him to be honest with her in return.
Parasites kill their host. How long do I have left?
So when Dreamscape Ace says,
"You weren't born broken,"
Nancy finally lets herself start to believe it. If it comes from him, it's the truth. Something else that's interesting, Ace back in real life during this episode was also dressed similarly to Ace in 212. And based on everything else here, I don't feel like this costuming department does coincidences. Maybe a hint that real life Ace isn't too far from his Dreamscape counterpart?
I think you always were, Nancy.
It's also pretty similar to the shirt back in 201 when...
Just because I'm mad at you doesn't mean I want to lose you.
Apparently this is the Nace vulnerability outfit of season 2. The door. The final door matches the door to Nancy's room, or I should say 2 doors. The door leading out of her room, specifically inside, the outside is different, and her closet door. If it's the closet, possible callback to episode 113, The Whisper Box, and the similar decision she made there, walking through the door back to reality to live her life. But if it's her bedroom door, it's a possible callback to how Nancy reacted after she found out the truth of her birth in 117, The Girl in the Locket. She closed that door in Carson's face and ran away.
You shouldn't be alone right now.
Yeah, well. Turns out I've been alone my whole life.
You know that's not true.
This fits with what she admitted here about feeling like she was broken from the start ever since she learned that truth. But finally, Nancy comes to terms with the beginning of her story, and, with the least hesitation yet, opens the door and moves forward. Area 5. All the Nancys and the Wraith in Icarus Hall. In the final room of the dreamscape, Nancy finally faces the Wraith, and all of her past selves have shown up to see the outcome. Location: Icarus Hall. The last time Nancy was here in episode 215, her blood and connection to Temperance were also key to ending a curse. The Icarans who survived that curse also went on to become the Road Back, who killed Celia for helping Nancy. Background items. Nancy's journal is ripped up and scattered across the ground. Her journal is her private space where she connects the dots on her mysteries, but she's also used it to keep things safe, like her mother's letter. The journal basically is Nancy's headspace, invaded and ripped apart by the Wraith. We've seen Nancy's journal be corrupted twice before. First, in 109 when Karen read it without Nancy's permission and used it to get Carson arrested, and most recently in 214 after Nancy refocused on bringing Everett to justice, not necessarily jail.
So you thought that Ryan deserved to die because you were tired of how the world works?
Now, cutting her ties to the Wraith spills blood on those pages. It's a shot that feels oddly evocative of George's harpoon staining Odette's love letters. While Nancy is debating severing her ties to the Wraith, Temperance's knife appears in her hand. It's appropriate that the item that helped bring the Wraith about also ends it, but the knife has also been seen in Nancy's dreams before. In the nightmare that started off episode 216, Everett Hudson used this same knife to slice Nancy's throat. Once the Wraith has been put to rest, lotus blossoms bloom on the tree containing it. Among other things, lotus blossoms are said to represent life, death, rebirth, and spiritual enlightenment. And here's where I want to take a minute to talk about the Wraith. So most of this discussion has been about connections that are in-universe, but if you'll forgive me a short detour before we leave the dreamscape behind, I want to quickly discuss what it and the Wraith represent, and why the sequence works so well. The cast and crew have confirmed that the Wraith is intended as a metaphor for depression and struggles with mental health. And this sort of metaphor can often be troublesome. Okay, so it's a metaphor for something serious, but you can't cure real-life depression with something as simple as a magic ritual. But it's not that simple here either. The dreamscape is why the Wraith as a metaphor works so well. The Wraith isn't actually the problem. It might be the immediate threat, but the hard part is all these layers of trauma that Nancy has buried instead of processing. The Wraith is only a way to emphasize that Nancy isn't okay. All the way back in Season 1, Episode 4, Carson told her,
"Whatever you're feeling, you can carry it with you, but you can't let it consume you."
And after everything Nancy has now accepted about herself, at the moment of truth, she isn't cold or arrogant, but she is decisive and compassionate. She doesn't turn away from her truth, but she doesn't wallow in it. She isn't stuck in the past, but she is bringing it with her. By the end of the dreamscape, Nancy is finally able to say,
"The trauma's still there, but I think I'm strong enough to hold it now."
Awakening. With the Wraith safely buried, and Nancy having fully accepted herself, darkest moments and all, she wakes up back in the real world. You may have thought this meant we were done, but not quite yet. This sequence appears to be a direct parallel to when Nancy woke up in the Whisper Box. The difference is, back then, Nancy woke up from the warm illusion of the Whisper Box to a colder reality where she wasn't ready to be vulnerable with Nick. But now, Nancy wakes up from a cooler toned dreamscape to a warmer reality where she doesn't turn away from Ace. And just in case you were thinking this is a coincidence, not only do we get a very similar framing, but Nancy is even wearing a similar outfit, a blue and red striped shirt under a coat in the opposite color. Finally, I will leave you with one last delightful detail. The shot when Nancy wakes up and everyone is gathered around her is a reference to when Dorothy wakes up from Oz.
And you were there.
And that brings us to the end. If you got this far, first of all, I really appreciate you. It'd be great if you gave this video a like, and I would love to hear from you in the comments, and thank you for watching.